Okay, so what we're going to do today is get started with VB, Visual Basic .NET, and actually look at creating a quick application in VB.NET and XAML. So what you want to be able to do is go ahead and open up Microsoft Visual Studio. And if you don't have it, you can download it from the site and download a free copy of Microsoft Visual Studio. Microsoft Visual Studio, after you download, what you're going to do is you're going to get Microsoft Visual Studio and you'll get Blend, which looks something like it, but it's designed for making interfaces and stuff like that. But we'll talk about that later. But for right now, you want to go ahead and open up Microsoft Visual Studio. And if you think about Microsoft Visual Studio, you want to think of it almost like a place where it allows you to be able to program in different languages, but it condenses everything down to a common language, if you really want to think about it that way. So we're here in Microsoft Visual Studio, and now what we're going to do here is go down here to create new project, or you want to go here to file, new project. You're going to get this window here, and we're going to be using Visual Basic, but if you're using Visual C Sharp, then you can go ahead and click on these templates here, and it'll give you all the Visual C Sharp templates on the right hand side. Over here, Visual Basic, I'm clicking on that to give me all the templates here. Technically speaking, everything you could do in C, you can do in VB, although the languages have some advantages and disadvantages for each one. The main thing you want to focus on, though, is that once you click Visual Basic, that you're in the proper .NET framework. Right now, 4.5 is not the most recent. Actually, no, 4.5 is not the most recent. Yeah, 4.61 is the most recent. But we're okay with using 4.5 or even 4 for what we're going to do. It won't make a difference. What we're going to do now is go over here and click WPF application. You're going to name your application down here. And then you're going to decide where you want to store that application right here by clicking Browse and selecting the folder where you want to save the application. You're also creating a solution, and then you're going to want this clicked where it says Create a Directory for the solution, so it stores all of your information into one directory. Once that's done, go ahead and click OK. Now what I like to do is just quickly run it just to make sure everything is fine the way it is. Right now we have an application and it's able to be executed and ran just like any other application by hitting start up here. And it's testing the speed, it's testing everything here on the side, diagnostics, but you don't have to worry about that. Right here is the window, here's our application window right here. And right now we haven't changed the name and we haven't added anything, but it automatically gives us this minimize, this expand, and this close button, this maximize and close button. If we wanted to change this title up here, we can then look at the structure of the application based on how based on how Visual Studio is presenting it to us. Right now we have our main window here, and it's presenting it to us by way of the design view. And right underneath the design view, you see this tab here, there's the XAML. So the XAML, if you want to think about it, it's almost like XML and it's almost like HTML. So what you see here is represented down here by the XAML, and I'll give you a quick example of that. So I can come down here and I can just start typing, let's say like text block, and I can give that text block a name. Maybe I'll call that text name, and then I'll call that txt. And then I can close that up. And then when you look up here, if I were to select this text block, it may not seem like I have a text block here, but really I do. If I select this part and then I select this text block, you'll see this line here. is representing the text block. It's just that I don't have any height and width. If I were to make a height of 22, let's say, you will now start seeing the structure of the text block come up on the screen. And then I was to say width, right? And then I was to say something like 100. Now you can really see a text block. Now I just typed that in here inside of the XAML, and this is the XAML code. It requires us to have an opening and closing tag. Right now, here's the open tag, and this right here is a close tag. This is one way of writing it all in one line. So if I were to go over here where all my tools are, if you look over here, you see the tools palette over here. If you don't see the tools palette, then you can go to view, and then you can go down here to toolbox, and it'll open it up. And once it opens it up, you want to go ahead and hit the pen so it doesn't hide. So over here, I'm going to go ahead and select a text block, and I'm just going to drag that text block over here, right? So this text block is the same as the text block that I made, except this one has more parameters in it. If I were to take these parameters here and copy it into my text block, I'll leave the name there. Basically now I have two text blocks exactly the same, except one of these text blocks, this one here, has a text property, says text block, and this one has a text property, says text block, but you only see one up here. And it's because I have the same margin, they're in the same spot. If I were to change this margin, let's say, now you'll see that that went up to 100 and this one's down at 237. So we could pretty much do everything here in XAML. The other thing you need to understand is that XAML and the properties are directly connected. For instance, for this text block here, I'm going to go ahead and take the name off there. So I don't have a name there. This text box doesn't have a name. This text block doesn't have a name either. So I can type the name in there like I did the first time, or I can select the text block object and come over here in the properties and change the name. So I'm going to name A. Now after I type that and I hit enter, you'll see down over here next to this text block, it automatically wrote that in the XAML. So whatever I do over here has a direct correlation to what happens over here and vice versa. If I were to have the name here, I would automatically see it over here. Okay. So another thing you need to understand about XAML is that it's really designed to allow you to have more rich environments, like visual environments, interfaces and stuff like that. So let's just say, for instance, I was to grab a button. Let me just double click that button and it'll come up on stage. I'm going to move this button around. And if you notice, I'm trying to move this button around and I'm trying to move things around, but this button ended up inside of the text block. Now, if I select this text block, you'll notice I have a text block, and as I go down the text block here, I get this inline UI container. All this was written because I dropped it inside of there. And inside the inline UI container, I have this button. And the reason for that is because when I double click my button, I have my text block selected. So you always have to be aware of what you have selected, and then I have my closing text block. And this is what I was talking about, having the opening and closing declarations. If I were to delete this and then select my grid and then double click on the button, you'll notice now I have a button with a closing tag here inside the grid. So now I can move it anywhere inside the grid. It's not stuck inside of the text block. When you have any object selected over here in the properties, what I was getting at before was that rich sort of interface that you're able to develop by using the brushes of all the elements. So if I wanted to change the background color of this, I would select the brush, go to the background, and then select the color that I want. I can even select an image. We don't have any images right now, but I can easily do that. Right. So right now I made the background clear so you can see through it. I can change the foreground color. After I'm done with the brushes, I can go down here to the text, change the font, and change the size. And pretty much everything's customizable. And later on, we'll be getting into templates and styles. And we can see we could completely make this out of something that doesn't even look like a button and still act like a button. So right now we have our button here, but let's get down to the meat of the project that we want to do, since we have that small introduction to XAML here and VB and Windows. Here we have our, I'm going to delete this. So here we have our interface. Here we have our XAML. Now, in order for me to be able to interact with anything here on stage or in my XAML, as far as the VB code goes, I have to go to what's called the code behind. And over here in my project solutions panel explorer, I have my solution here and I have my project here. Now, the thing you need to understand is that a solution can hold many projects, but for right now we only have one project here. Here's my main window, and I can see that my main window has a file name here, has a build action, but this is not what I'm concerned with when it comes to VB. What I want to do is click on this arrow down here. Here's my VB code right here. And when I selected it, you notice that this tab opened up. Right now I don't have any code up in there, but that's okay. We're going to add that later. For right now, let's go over here and we're going to go ahead and add some information to our application that resembles our game or whatever we're making. So I'm going to first, I know for a fact I want an image back here. So I'm going to go to my tools and I'm going to go to the image tool. And I'm going to just double click that. I'm going to make sure my grid is selected. And I'm going to double click that image. And then I'm going to drag it all the way across till it's the same size as the main window. Now that I have my image selected, I'm going to name my image MG background. Then I'm going to go to my brush. And then I can add an image here. Now, there's many ways to get images inside of your project. The best way to do this is to grab your image and to drag it directly in where you want it. And it will automatically put it inside of there. So if you import an image and it has this sort of look to it, all you need to do is right click it and put include in project. Then it'll look like a little image icon like that. Once you have that image there in your project, you can then go ahead and click on the image icon there, the image object. And the images and the background take sources differently. The image itself, you don't necessarily go to the brush for that. What you're going to want to do is go to common, and here under the source is what you want to click on to be able to add a background image to that image itself. But instead of adding a image as the background, I can do this and then I can go to the image and then stretch out the dimensions. Stretch here, uniform, and then go to uniform, uniform to fill, and it fills in the entire image. That's one thing I could do, but as you can see, this image, I'm able to move around, and if I wanted to change that, that's fine. Or what I could have done, instead of the image, what I could have done is gotten rid of the image, select on the grid, and click on brush, and the background, I could have gone here to add an image to the background. Like that. So now it doesn't move around, it's part of the background. So I'm going to leave this image here. I'm just going to add Control Z is to go back, and I'm going to click on the grid and then go to the background. I'm going to select the background. I'm going to select the image for the background. So that way I have the image as the background, and if I wanted to add anything on top of that, I have my image down here. So the next thing we want to go ahead and do is add our other images. I'm going to go ahead and add myself a button here. First, I'm going to make sure I have my grid selected. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the button. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to that button's background, and I'm going to click on image, and then I'm going to go to my sources, and that second button image I imported, I'm going to make that into the button's image itself. Now from there, I can go ahead and name my button. So now I have a button that looks pretty interesting, you know, like my image. And I'm just going to get rid of that outline of the button. So I'm going to select my button. I'm going to go to the border, and I'm going to make it to where there's no border. So now let me just test this out by running it. First, I'm going to save it, and then I'm going to run it by hitting F5. So now I have a background and I have a button that looks like one of my images, which is cool. Now, when you highlight over it, it's going to go back to the button look, and that's what I was talking about with the styles and the templates. We can change that later. It's a little bit more involved for what we want to do right now. So now I'm just going to go ahead and add a label. And the one thing I do want to point out is that every time I add something, down here in the XAML is adding it below in the XAML, below everything. So XAML is looking at this in an opposite way. It's looking at whatever's on top is technically below everything else that goes down this way. So this label here is above everything. If I were to take this label and put it all the way up here, then you wouldn't see the label because it'll be behind the background. That's something you kind of want to always keep in mind. So now I have my label. I'm just going to take out the content of this label by going to the label down here and taking out the content that's currently there. And so all I want to do is do a test. I want to be able to run my application, click on this button, and I'm going to change the content of this button by going here to the button's content and typing in press. And when I click off of the label, you notice you can't see it unless you put the mouse over it. If that's the case, you can just go down into your XAML and click on the label, and there it is. It'll highlight from there. So now what I want is my simple application. I want my simple application that when I press the button, I want some information to come up there, like hello world or something like that. So the best way to do this, especially when dealing with Visual Basic, I talked before about this code behind. Now I could go over here and I can type out a procedure and then have it run when I click on the button. But the easiest way to do this is to double click on this button, and what happens is VB, or Visual Studio, will create a procedure for me where I can put the code inside of here for when the button is clicked. And the way I know that this procedure works with that button is this element right here says handles, BT, and enter. This is why we named the button initially. So when we double click on it and it writes it for us, it's going to be the proper name. I can also go from this button down here in the XAML, and I can see that that is the name of the button, BT and enter. Okay. So what I want to be able to do is when I click on that button, I am going to see hello world inside of the label. In order to do that though, I have to name my label. If I click on my label, you'll see there's no name there. So I'm going to have to name my label txt info. Okay. So now what I can do is I can go back here using these tabs, and I can type in txt info. And I want, what property do I want in info? Let's see. So the info label has a content property right here, and it's empty right now. As you can see, if I put information in that content property, it puts it inside of there. So in my code, that's what I want to do in code when the person presses the button. So I'm going to say .content here, and that's going to equal hello world. So that should work. Now let's do a test. I'm going to hit F5 and run this. So when I click on this, and yes, it says hello world. Perfect. We made our first application using WPF and VB.NET and Visual Studio. I hope this helps you guys out. If you have any questions, make sure you put them in the comments below.